Hello, my name is Carol Lynn, and I'm talking to you from Dayton, Kentucky, St. Bernard's Catholic Church. Today we're just going to talk a little bit about how we got here and the people that came before us. And so to get right down to it, we were of German descent, most of the people. And in the late 1840s, there was about 40 Catholic families, and in order to go to church, they had to get horse and buggy and go all the way to Newport, or a ferry and go to Cincinnati, St. Francis de Sales Church. They organized two societies to begin to get money to build their own church. So by 1853, they had laid a cornerstone for a little brick church, only 40 by 60 feet, and it was dedicated to St. Francis of Assisi. Unfortunately, they built it very much close to the river, and so the river became their enemy. Every year there would seem to be a little more damage. But they hung in. A few years after that, they bought some land for a cemetery, St. Francis Cemetery, which there are about 900 parishioners that have been buried there. They used that cemetery from like 1858 until 1945. But meanwhile, back at the church, the community was growing in leaps and bounds, and they needed a larger church, which they did build, but unfortunately built it in the same spot as the other one, so we were still on the riverbank. And it was twice as big, but the river had no mercy on it and started beating it. At the same time, there was pretty much dead on the new church. So the pastor and the Board of Trustees decided, along with two other churches in the diocese, to do some investing in a rope company and I think nail company. And the sad part was when the dividends came, instead of giving it into the church treasury, which was the one who held the loan, they were putting a lot in their pockets. So the bank declared bankruptcy, locked the doors of the church. It was no longer ours. The people, the bishop then stepped in, bought it back for a lesser amount with the good parishioners paying it off. But the river was merciless, and in 1907, it came up in January and March and did major destruction. In fact, they had an engineer come from Cincinnati that declared it unsafe. They literally put log chains around the base of the church to secure the structure and was continuing to go to church there. Meanwhile, they bought a piece of land knowing that they were going to have to move on, and that's where I'm sitting now. It was bought from an old riverboat captain, and within 2 years had the foundation laid and the cornerstone put. But again, financial restrictions kind of stopped it. Well, then the wonderful flood of 1913, which was, I think, historic, literally took the church down. The spire was in the backyard. The floor was ripped from the foundation. It was as a bomb had hit the church. It was beyond repair. And the Sisters of Divine Providence wrote in their daily logbook that the bishop came and said, well, she's a wreck now. God has done it. Father, you must move ahead and build, and I'm behind you. And that began the building of this church. Within a year, they had the basic structure. First Mass was held here August of 1914, and it looked quite different then. There were no stained glass windows, and there was a very plain mission front with no vestibule. So as the parishioners went on, we began to adorn God's house. The first thing was 1919. The windows were put in from behind the altar. They are the four doctors of the church: Saints Ambrose, Augustine, Gregory, and Bernard. The next year, the two large windows on the transept were added, and they are St. Peter receiving the keys of the kingdom from Christ, and Christ with the children is on the other one. The cost in those days was $1,250. It wasn't until 1932 that the remaining windows were done. They are the 8 Beatitudes, and were done during the Depression years, really, and yet somehow the people came up. They were $850 each. Today, these beautiful windows are heavily insured. They are, of course, irreplaceable. But 10 years ago, they were in need of serious repair and cleaning, which had to be done by a professional. And so the parishioners, once again, you know, we tightened our belts and got busy and came up with $100,000 to have them. And they took each window out and did the restoration. So we do treasure our treasure. These are our treasures. In 1929, then, they built a beautiful Roman facade on the front of the church, which then gave us our vestibule. The floor of the vestibule is beautiful Italian marble, and on it says St. Bernard and an AMDG, which stands for To the Greater Glory of God. And in 1929, the school behind the church was built. But as the years went by with the decline of inner cities population, in 2002, our school sadly closed. The schools in Dayton, Bellevue, and Newport combined to make one elementary Catholic school, and that is Holy Trinity in Bellevue. In 1957, we tore down the old captain's house and put in a new rectory. As I said, the school was built in 1925. At that time, they put a boiler in the basement, ran it underground to heat this church. So the church had these gigantic radiators that clanked and banged and trying to push some heat from way back there over to here. Well, we had sort of a rest in peace ceremony when it died, which was about two and a half years ago. With all of the estimates and everything that came in, we knew it was going to be a lot of money. And then said, gee, we've never had AC. Let's do air conditioning too while we're going into this insane. So the heating and air conditioning was finished last year, and it was paid in full last year. This little community, very small parish, came up with more than $500,000. We had some very generous benefactors. We must start there. But then the second thought was, the Undercroft desperately needed to be updated. So the thought was, why don't we sell tiles on the walls to the parishioners, and that would make money toward the heating. That developed into, not only did we just do tiles, but we also replicated these beautiful windows of the 8 Beatitudes downstairs. And the family will say, gee, I want my name with blessed are they who mourn, or blessed are the merciful. And it's a beautiful thing we've done and made money, again, toward this heating and air conditioning. As we look at the statues in our beautiful church, some of them have some historic value. The 2 adoring angels on the main altar were brought from the old St. Francis Church, so they actually came to our town in 1850s. The 14 stations of the cross that go around the walls of the church also came from St. Francis, as did St. Anthony's statue. And every now and then there's a pretty story that comes up about one of the statues, and that is our little infant of Prague. During World War II, there was a dear parishioner, not a wealthy woman, had 4 sons in Europe and the South Pacific fighting. She came here every day, prayed for her boys to come home safe, prayed with devotion to Infant of Prague. The boys came home safe, and she bought that statue. I always had heard the story, but I wanted to, authenticate it. So I found the grandchildren, and I have the emails, what we do today with our media. And the 3 grandchildren remembered in detail and said their grandma was very poor, and she scrubbed floors and cleaned houses to make enough money to buy that little statue. So it's, we look at the little statue, but it meant so much and her boys did all come home safe. So that's our statues. Our Pieta It's beautiful, again, from St. Francis Church. About 5 years ago, a very good parishioner paid quite a bit of money to have it completely refurbished. And when the craftsmen brought it back in that day, I was here, and they said, well, they knew it was more than 125 years ago because the composition, it was horsehair and straw and whatever, they knew that that's how they did it a long time ago. So each of our statues tell a story, and many times people will say, you know, you Catholics adore statues. I have pictures of my kids all over my living room, and I don't adore the pictures, but I adore who they represent. And I said, so these statues are our friends, and they give us a good feeling to think maybe they're pulling for us on the other side. The church is large. It accommodates over 500 people. It has the theater staging to where the back is a little higher, and I believe 14 inches is the slant of the church. That concludes our visit here in Dayton, Kentucky, St. Bernard's Catholic Church. We always welcome new people. There'll be information at the end if anyone is interested in even a personal tour or anything. Please contact us. We would love to see you, and God bless everybody.